Hey, my name's Savannah Ray, and I'm going to be talking about question number 1, which is what are the features of a successful revolution based on our collective research? Based on what we learned in class, there are many factors that can influence the development of revolutionary movements that make them successful. We, as a group, agreed that a successful revolution can be defined as a movement that creates a change in power, unifies a group of people, achieves its goals while making a long-lasting impact. Successful revolutions don't always result in a positive effect on society, but they are still considered successful revolutions. Within our group, there are 4 examples out of the 5 that are considered successful revolutions, one of them being the Italian Renaissance. This was a successful revolution because the unifying idea of humanism and its influence on the progression of this society's culture. The Protestant Reformation was a successful revolution because new theological ideas started to appeal to people. One similarity between the 2 revolutions is the idea that the Italian Renaissance was able to achieve its own change while also influencing the Protestant Reformation. The Glorious Revolution was a success because it carried out without any bloodshed and immediately resulted in an official Bill of Rights for England, giving the English exactly what they desired as a result of the change of their government. A peaceful ending to the reign of James II and preservation of their liberty, which has continued to the present day. The Scientific Revolution was a success because it accomplished its goals to create a more enlightened culture, make societal advancements, and create a world that is more easily navigable. A big contributing factor to a movement's success is its existence of powerful motivations for revolution that cut across major classes and unify people of society's population behind the goal of revolution. We can see this during the Protestant Reformation. After years of abuse and corruption from the Catholic Church, people saw that they needed to reform, and everyone shared this common idea through their thinking. They all strived to create a change within the religious homogeneity country set by years of traditions and dogma. As the people of the Western Europe continued to push for this social change, they soon received what they've longed for. All 4 of these revolutions made a dramatic change to society and achieved their goals. Collectively, most of our revolutions were able to create a change and impact society in different ways, while they all are still being considered successful. The Italian Renaissance, the Scientific Revolution, the Protestant Reformations all took place during the same time period in early modern Europe. The Scientific Revolution took place from the 15th century to 17th century, and the Protestant Reformation took place in the middle of that during the 16th century, and the Italian Renaissance took place at the same time as the Scientific Revolution, and they shared many similarities, such as the idea of creating a more enlightened world.
My name is Alan Mills, and I'll be discussing the question, what are the features of an unsuccessful revolution based on your collective research? As a group, we felt that I should be the one to discuss this question because, as a whole, everyone else's revolutions were successful but the one I chose. The features of an unsuccessful revolution are a change in power but with no real change in how things are run. In class, we discussed removing the teacher but bringing in someone who would run class the same way. This wouldn't be a revolution because the way things are run wasn't changed. But if we removed the teacher and we as a class ran the class as a democracy, this would be a revolution because the power structure had been changed. Another feature that can cause a failure is weak or unrealistic goals to a revolution and an unwilling society to back the revolution. If the revolution can't win over the society, it's very hard for a revolution to succeed. Only one revolution in our group was a complete failure, which was the attempt of the South during the Civil War. The South was too weak and was unable to attain its original goal of seceding from the Union and keep states' rights and slavery. The South did achieve some goals. However, they were able to separate and create a change in power. This was not enough, however, to consider the revolution a success. Just because a revolution can achieve some of its goals doesn't make it a successful revolution. In the case of the Civil War, the revolution as a whole ultimately failed due to the sudden death of the leader and the overarching strength of the North. There can be aspects of a successful revolution that are seen as small failures within the revolution. The Scientific Revolution and the Glorious Revolution are examples of this. Although the Scientific Revolution was a success, it did encounter many failures, such as the ideas that there was much controversy about science taking the place of religion, and failures among experimenting and spreading research discovered to society. The Glorious Revolution was almost entirely a success because it ended the horrible reign of King James II and planted seed for the constitutional monarchy that has been in place ever since. The only failure that really seems to be a problem is that it inspired other revolutions all over Europe that didn't necessarily turn out good. But in the case of England, this revolution was completely positive. Through our collective research, we can see that these two revolutions created positive change, but may have affected others in society negatively, like the power of the church or one's influence other countries to create more change. This is good and bad that can come from a revolution, and most of the time, a revolution cannot be fully defined or decided as good or bad. Ultimately, it comes down to weighing the positives and negatives. There are many revolutions in which they achieved all their initial goals, but are not considered to be successful overall. There are also some cases where some people will claim they were a success, while others will claim they were a failure. In class, we have a very broad definition of what a revolution could be. This might lead us to classify some revolutions as a success, where others would classify them as a failure. A person's definition of the opinion can really determine whether a revolution was a success or a failure.
In our assigned reading, Trio focuses on the topic of history being altered by many historians throughout time. Our knowledge of history can be limited because much of it is left out either purposely or subconsciously. There are many ways the past can be silenced, such as omission of events, judgments, or sharing personal memory. As people try to write their own version of history, they begin to leave out important facts and push it to the background. For example, after the Civil War, many Southerners like to say that the cause of the war was due to Northerners taking away states' rights. The reason Southerners claim this is because they wanted to be able to keep their rights. If they had these, then they would be able to keep their slaves. But it was only a small part of the war. Slavery was another key contributor, not just states' rights. History can be controlled by those who share and retell it, which later affects how people will view historical occurrences. When looking back at the Italian Renaissance, all of the big thinkers and renowned artists are men. Women did not play a large role in this revolution, despite making up half of the population. Their voice, thoughts, and ideas were suppressed and never acknowledged. Similarly, scientific revolution silences the historical record that included conflict among scientists about differing beliefs and failures. Some of these disputes are mentioned, such as Galileo's idea of the heliocentric solar system and other philosophers of early modern Europe. However, many are not recorded. People can address past events based on their biased opinions. The Protestant Reformation can be seen as one of those revolutions where people can let their biased perspectives get in the way of real facts. Their religious views can play an underlying part in their writings. The Glorious Revolution is an example of a revolution with very little silencing. It is unique because it was an uprising with little to no bloodshed, and that led to a much more prosperous period of time for Britain than before. So more attempts are made to promote and recognize the events of the Glorious Revolution than to silence it. If anything, it is silenced in that it is not widely recognized as a reason for other revolutions that happened soon afterward in other parts of the world, although it helped inspire some much bloodier revolutions. Trio elaborated on the differences between a story that is remembered versus historical facts that exist. We, as non-historians, rely on the writing of those who can collect and inform us about past events. As students, we have grown up reading history textbooks that tell us their version of history. With their biased opinions, they share how they want to tell it. Trio's writings are important for our future. He has opened our eyes to this issue that not many notice that it's happening. He presents the problems that exist when our history is controlled by those in power of recording historical records. These people have the opportunity to affect our future, and it is important that we are aware of this so we can have the best possible understanding of historical events through our research, and come away with an unbiased perception of the past.
Hi, I'm Megan Newsom, and I will be doing our fourth question, which is, what would Trio say are the main power structures in your research areas, and how did these power structures affect the outcome of your revolutions? So, in many of our cases, the main power structures are those that dominated that specific society and maintained their rule despite what revolution was occurring. In the Protestant Reformation and the Italian Renaissance, the Catholic Church was the most powerful institution and maintained most of the influence. The main power structures of the Italian Renaissance would be the heads of those churches who would pay artists for their work. They had most of the power at the time, and this obviously overlaps with the Protestant Reformation. Similar to the Italian Renaissance, the main power of the Protestant Reformation was the Catholic Church and the Pope. They had an enormous amount of wealth and were able to put themselves in power after the fall of the Roman Empire. They were able to influence European countries spiritually and politically. This power naturally made people want to reform against it. In this case, we can see a duality between these revolutions, with the difference being the Catholic Church's approval. While it encouraged the art and the ideas of the Renaissance to the point of paying its way, it did anything it could to stunt the strength of the Protestant Reformation. It comes down to these power structures only having so much power and only being able to control and influence so many people. These show that there are limits to power structures in any society. There are other examples. There are other examples of power structures in our group. The main power structure of the scientific revolution would be the prolific scientists that collaborated to discover more advanced ideas, such as Galileo, Newton, Descartes, and Copernican. These scientists and mathematicians combined their brilliant ideas and inventions with each other and with other scientists to make scientific advancements. In this case, there weren't really any power structures to limit the progression of this revolution of scientific discovery. Going off of that, the power structures in the Civil War are a bit blurred as well. There is the power structure between the master and the slave across all of the South, and in a larger sense, the president obviously was the main power structure. However, this revolution is about overthrowing that power structure and separating from it. So in some revolutions, the power structures can be unclear or not have a large impact on the revolution overall. In another case, the power structure of the Glorious Revolution is quite clear. The main power structures in the Glorious Revolution were King James II of England and his daughter Mary, and her husband William of Orange. Also, the Catholics and Protestants, and the British monarchy and the Parliament. The revolution happened because of religious and political tensions, with King James II serving as the face of the Catholics in the monarchy, and William of Orange the face of the Protestants in the Reformed Parliament he aimed to have take over following the overthrow. While the country was largely equally Catholic and Protestant at this time, many of the citizens eventually deferred to William anyways because his proposed new system of government would give them the liberty they lacked with James II at the throne. Power structures affect revolutions in many different manners depending on how much power they truly have and what that structure thinks of the ideals of a specific revolution. Sometimes power structures play a large part in how a revolution plays out, and other times revolutions seemingly just occur without needing any explanation or any influence from a power structure.
We've discussed in detail many of the factors that go into making a revolution happen, different players in several revolutions, and most of all, if they were successful or not. But the last aspect to consider when studying a particular revolution is the end of it. As a group, we believe the end of a revolution can only be definitively marked by one or several major occurrences that bring an end to conflict and mark the turning of a page in the region. Most traditional revolutions involving power struggles and often war, an example from our group being the Civil War, have an obvious end, while societal and cultural revolutions, such as the Italian Renaissance, have a more murky ending and are arguably ongoing to this day. Above all, the legacy of a revolution and lasting impact to the modern day are huge in determining the end of a revolution. Some revolutions have very obvious ends marked by a date in history that is widely accepted as the end of the revolution. The American Civil War, for example, was defined by ongoing fighting between the Union and Confederate forces from the years 1861 to 1865. The constant during this time was conflict, with citizens of the United States living in fear as they were dragged through this process. On April 9, 1865, General Lee of the Confederacy officially surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, an action that most historians agree marked the end of this revolution. This is for two reasons, the first being the fact that a treaty was signed. Official documentation is generally a strong indicator of the end of a revolution because it's signaling of an agreement between both sides. The second reason is the fact that the series of battles came to a conclusion and the citizenry could breathe a collective breath of fresh air and move towards repairing the broken nation. The Glorious Revolution is another example of a revolution with a definitive end, although rather than one date that marked an official end to it, there were several occurrences that together brought about the end of King James II's reign. On December 8, 1688, William of Orange completed his advance on England and met with James's representatives, coming to a mutual agreement on how to proceed. Over the next 3 days, the King, Queen, and Prince of Wales all attempted to flee the country, an obvious sign of their surrender. These mark the changing of the guard in the British government, but the establishment of Britain's first official Bill of Rights in December 1869 was the defining moment in the end of the Glorious Revolution. This not only gave the citizenry the liberty they had lacked for years, but it signaled the beginning of more wide-scale changes, and got most of the country on board with William of Orange and his ability to rule, if they weren't already before. The Protestant Reformation had a very definitive end that is widely accepted by historians as well. The Reformation culminated in the 30 Years' War, after which most involved were looking for a resolution. The Peace of Westphalia was a series of peace treaties signed in Germany that marked the end of the major European wars on religion. This is another example of documentation that can easily be pointed to as the ending of the revolution. The American Civil War, Glorious Revolution, and Protestant Reformation are all revolutions that have a definitive end to the conflict itself, all involving documentation that brought lasting peace. With other revolutions, the end is much less clear and closely tied to the impact on the modern world. The Italian Renaissance is an example, as the tradition from medieval to early modern Europe brought about a larger interest in arts, science, and philosophy, among other things. This change clearly still impacts Europe and the rest of the world today, as these interests are and always will be preached in schools around the world. The transition itself occurred many years ago, but the lasting impact and the fact that after the rebirth of ancient Greek and Roman thinking styles, they never went away again, means that this revolution never really ended. Much of the same can be said for the scientific revolution, which occurred even before the Renaissance, but similarly continues to affect societies everywhere. Scientists such as Galileo and Isaac Newton helped bring about a new and more educated understanding of math, biology, physics, astronomy, and other scientific ideas which transcended the way humans perceive the world. The scientific revolution helped plant the seeds for the ever-growing understanding of science that continues to be built upon today. Those revolutionary figures who got the scientific revolution underway are long gone, but their teachings have always been recognized and always will be, meaning this revolution will never truly end. To conclude, different types of revolutions can officially end, but many others are ongoing to this day. In most cases, there are many interpretations, as marking the end of a revolution is an incredibly subjective matter. Historians should look to commonalities like documentation that brings about peace, or a clear surrender by one side to mark the end of a revolution, and lasting impacts that continue to affect society today as factors that lead to never-ending revolutions. And speaking of the end, that's the end of the video. We hope you enjoyed.